Devin White and Budda Baker requesting trades this week. What does that mean for the Raiders? Are we in? Are we out? Are we looking? Is this a possibility? I'm going to tell you what I think. Let me start off with Budda Baker. I think Budda Baker is an excellent safety. Top 5 safety in the league. Has been for the last, several years. Obviously does everything well. Coverage, tackling, smart player, can be a leader on the defense. But I don't think it's going to happen. And primarily I don't think it's going to happen because of money. He wants to be traded, but he also wants a contract redone, and he wants to be amongst the highest paid safeties, if not the highest paid safety in the league. It's going to cost you $18-20 million a year, and I just don't think the Raiders are going to shell out that kind of cash. And I think when we talk about Devin White, it's going to be a similar situation. Now, Devin White, I think, is a little bit, not quite as elite at linebacker as Budda Baker is at safety, just because I think that there's some coverage issues there with Devin White, and we already got coverage issues with linebacker, so I don't know how great of a fit that is for us. But I would love to see him brought in, because he would definitely be an upgrade over anything we got in our locker room right now. There's no question about it. But he also wants his contract redone. And I think if there's anything we've learned this offseason is the Raiders aren't giving out the cash. They're just not. They're not in it on the big-time free agents. They're not in it for big contracts. We've spent amongst the most in the league this offseason, and we've made amongst the tops amount of moves as far as actual player acquisitions. But they're all 1- and 2-year contracts, nothing overly committed. And I think this is the strategy. I think as far as the defense goes, this is all about the draft for them. And I think that's what they're going to focus on. And while I'd love to have those players, and I think that you got to have, you want to have a great defense, got to have great players. But they're hoping they're going to strike gold in the draft. Look, with the way they've positioned themselves and doing so little in free agency on the defensive side, they're going to have to nail this draft with 3 or 4 starters on the defensive side. If not, I don't see how they could justify the way they approached the free agency, knowing how bad the defense was, if they don't absolutely murder it in the draft and get 3 or 4 starters out of it. Now, are there 3 or 4 starters in this draft that could be gotten if everything goes right? Absolutely. But we don't know. We don't know. Everything with this regime is an unknown. I don't have a lot of faith in them, but I'm also trying to stay optimistic and say, hey, let's see what happens. I'm just going to wait and see. And I think that's what we all got to do, kind of wait and see. But I'm telling you that everything is relying on this draft for the defense. That's it. They're not looking. Maybe next year they'll do something, but they're banking or they've pushed all their chips to the table on defense and said, we're betting on draft, right? And that's it. They're going to spin the wheel, and they're going to hope to hit their number. So we got to wait and see what happens. Now, I think when it comes to the draft, there are some great options out there. They got to nail the first 2-3 picks for sure. They got to nail those things. But I think that, like I said, they've pushed all their chips in. But I think now you can start to see that really it's going to come down to 3 positions for the Raiders with their first pick, whether that's number 7, move up to number 3, or move back. It's going to come down to one of 3 positions. It's either going to be quarterback, which I think is going to have to be a trade-up situation, unless they're really sold on a Will Levis or an Anthony Richardson. Maybe they are. I don't know. But they're going to have to be it's either quarterback, it's going to be cornerback, or it's going to be defensive tackle. That's what I believe it's going to be. It's one of those. They did bring in Jalen Carter. I'm sure most of you heard about the Jalen Carter. So, obviously, there was some reports that he was off their board. I made a video about that. You guys could check it out. But how he was off their board and they weren't considering him. And then McDaniels made sure he got a tweet out there through a Raiders beat writer. I think it was Vincent Bonsignor saying, hey, we're not out. And as a matter of fact, they actually brought him in for a visit. So I don't think they're out, which is smart. I had been saying for a while that I don't think they should be out on Jalen Carter. You can't. How can you be out on a player with that kind of talent? So I don't think that was real news. I think there was speculation, and I can see why. Right, with the character issues the Raiders have dealt with over the last few years. That they would be out on him. And at first, I was kind of out on him. But the more this thing has evolved and kind of unfolded, I'm in. And I'm not only in, I'm all in. I think, the only thing I wouldn't do is trade up for him. That's the only thing I wouldn't do. But if he's there at 7, I almost don't care who's there, unless it's a Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, which they are not going to be there. But if they were, they're the only 2 players I would take over Jalen Carter, period. The end of discussion. He's really the best player in the draft. You just cannot pass up on the most important position in the game, and that's quarterback. But you could pass up on anything else as far as I'm concerned, because I think he's the best player in the draft. Now, when you look at the Raiders, though, they brought in 6 quarterbacks, right? They brought in the top 4. Everybody knows who those guys are, right? But they also brought in Hendon Hooker. Most people know who he is. And then they brought in Aiden O'Connell out of Purdue, right? And they brought him for a top 30 visit as well. So obviously there's some interest there in him. And I'm sure they have interest in other quarterbacks. Listen, they're doing their due diligence everywhere. So I do think the Raiders are targeting a quarterback in this draft. I just think that they're probably not going to get one of the top ones because I wouldn't pick Levis or Richardson in the top at 7. And I know a lot of people are giving some flack because Richardson, everybody's up on him thinking he's the greatest thing, but running fast and jumping high and being a great athlete doesn't make you a great quarterback. And he has nothing on film that proves he's an NFL ready, going to be a top flight quarterback. I mean, he played at a top flight university and he had a 6-6 record and he completed 53% of his passes, and we can go on and on and on and on. Would I draft him later? Yeah, maybe I would. I would take him in the 2nd round, or I would take him later in the 1st round, possibly, if you move down far enough. And he just failed miraculously. But somebody's going to take a chance on him, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Colts are going to snatch him up at 4. But and then I feel the same about Will Levis. There's not a lot on tape. You can look back at his previous year. I know Mel Kiper's big on him, but hey, the tape don't lie. And I think that there's some, a lot of people have compared to say, is he the next Zach Wilson? And I think that's a pretty fair comparison. Now, we don't know what he can do, so you can't just say he is Zach Wilson. You can't lump him into some kind of bust status because you never know. I mean, you got players with similar comps to him as far as completion percentages and so on and so forth in the league now that are top flight, like a Josh Allen, right? And Josh Allen last year in Wyoming was not spectacular. And then now look what he's turned into. I don't think there's any team in the league outside of Kansas City and a few others that ain't wishing they had Josh Allen or wouldn't trade for him today. So, we can't write the young man off all the way right off the bat, but I do think that he's not really, top 7 material for me. So then we go to cornerback. And when it comes to cornerback, there are a few options, right? And I think that there are some possibilities that you're going to have. I think you could have 3 of the 3 top corners could all be there at number 7. That's realistic. And that's, Christian Gonzalez, Witherspoon, and Joey Porter Jr., right? Look, I am a big Witherspoon guy. I think Devin Witherspoon is the guy. He's the one, to me, he fits the Raiders. He would be a great Raider. I think he's the best tackler. I think he's the best all-around corner. He's not as big as the other 2 guys, but I don't think that really matters. He's still big enough, and he plays big. So I'm a big Witherspoon guy. So if I'm the Raiders, I'm taking Witherspoon over Christian Gonzalez and over Joey Porter Jr. But, I think that there's some definite chance, a big chance that the Raiders move down. Now, if they move down, Gonzalez and Witherspoon are going to be gone. So that's just not going to happen. But if they move down because they want to collect more capital, they move down to 12 with Houston or something like that, 11 with the Titans, then I think, then Joey Porter Jr. will be a great pickup there. I mean, Joey Porter Jr. is the prototypical. He got the DNA, obviously. He's got the build. Not the fastest guy, but for his size, I think he'll more than make up for that. And his technique, he's a great tackler. And I think there's a deep class in corner-wise, but I think it is smart to say quarterback if they're there, and it's the right one, cornerback, or defensive lineman. Now, the only other defensive lineman I want to mention here that people could talk about that I think is even in, I don't even want to say in the conversation, but even, maybe that next best defensive tackle, and I think that's Kalijah Cansey. Personally, that's what I think. I think he's the best. I think he's better than Brian Brzee and so on. So I think he's the second best defensive tackle. but he's just not worth the 7th pick. Now, look, if the Raiders were to move back a couple of times and they drop into the teens, let's say 16 with Washington or something like that, then I could see a Kalijah Kancey, because I think then that's about where he should be. But he's just not at 7. It's just not. He's just not 7th. He's just not top 10 yet, in my opinion. And maybe he is in some people's eyes, but I don't think so. I think he's, I think he goes in the middle of the first round. And I could even see a scenario where he's dropping into the low 20s. But he is. I don't think anybody has him evaluated up that high. I haven't seen any mocks with him going that high. So, there are some other good defensive tackles in this draft, but it's not super deep. It's not deep like tight end. It's not deep like corner. So, there are some good players, but you got to get them in the first, second round, I think. Otherwise, the main bulk of the talent is pretty washed out. So, Raiders, if they're going to get a defensive tackle, they don't get Carter in the first round. Maybe they get lucky at 38. Cancey's there. Boom. You slide in and take Kancey. And that would be a great value there at 38. So I think that would be a great pick. So, but I think that it's coming to focus now. And I think the likelihood is actually going to be defensive tackle or corner. And based on, I really only think one defensive tackle is worth the number 7 overall pick. I think it's going to be a cornerback. Now, you could say, well, what about defensive end with Tyree Wilson and whatever? But I don't know. Look, you got Max Crosby. He's elite. You got Chandler Jones. I know it was an off year, but we expect him to have a bounce back year. With 7, you really need to feel a real desperate need. And look, you can never have too many pass rushers. We all know the old mantra and kind of the normal saying around the league, and I think that's true. But it's not a desperate need for the team. It's not a desperate need. So I just don't think you plug that in at 7. So I think Tyree Wilson's a great player, going to be a great player, but I just don't think that's a super high need for the Raiders, and I don't think that they're going to take anything that's not a really, really big need for the team. Outside of a top quarterback, because they have Jimmy G technically going to be the bridge guy, but I think that, again, if they one of the top 2 were to somehow slip to number 3, I think then the Raiders make a move. We know they tried to get to 1, didn't happen. But if the Texans, slide, say forget it, I'm going to take Will Anderson or I'm going to take Jalen Carter or something like that, something wild like that, then I think it's going to be a bidding war, because I think the Colts are going to try to move up because they want to, even if it's only one position, just to make sure nobody else gets it. The Raiders, you could have a plethora of teams. You could have the Titans, I think, would try to move up. Maybe even the Commanders would try to move up. But there are going to be a plethora of teams on the phone with Arizona if that happens. So it will throw the whole draft really for a loop. So, but that's what I think is going to happen. I think it's going to be a corner, and I hope it's Devin Witherspoon. I mean, that's my selfish hope. And if they draft Witherspoon, I'll be happy. I think that's a solid way to start the draft. That's a player that I feel is, no player is ever bust proof, but I think that kid is pretty doggone close. So, the last thing I wanted to talk about here is, I think that there's an underlying story here with the Raiders that we all need to pay attention to. And I don't know if it's getting enough attention. Everybody's talking about, well, Josh McDaniels survived, well, David Ziegler survived. They're we don't trust them. They got to improve. And the way I look at it is, I don't think Mark Davis, I've said this before, I don't think Mark Davis is the end-all be-all for year for them. I think they're going to get one more year almost no matter what, barring a 2-15 season, 1-16 season, something really, really bad. I don't think that they're going to get fired, so I think they're going to have one more season. But the person who really, I think, does have their job on the line, and who really, I feel like, has been hung out to dry here is Patrick Graham. Now, listen, I'm not a big Patrick Graham guy, because he had a good defense in New York for 1 year. 1 year. The other year he was the defensive coordinator there, they were a 22nd ranked defense. So he had one good year in New York. Now, turned around the defense, and his last year there was pretty good, so that's how I think he got the job. And, the excuse right now is he don't have the personnel. Well, obviously they didn't do anything in free agency to give him personnel. So now everything is angled to where they got, as we discussed, they're trying to nail everything in the draft as far as defense, and they got to hit, and then Patrick Graham's got to make all those pieces work, and then the few little scraps that they picked up on the free agency, he's got to turn that around and make it a top 15 defense. I mean, really, if they want to have any chance of winning, it's got to be a top 15 defense. And if I were him, I'd be pretty pissed about this situation personally, because look, think about it. If you're Josh McDaniels and you go through this season and it turns out to not go good, right? But the offense performs. And let's face it, we already had a lot of money allocated for offense. They did nothing in this offseason except for add more money and firepower to the offense. So what's Josh McDaniels' ultimate out? His ultimate out is, hey, we didn't have a good season, but the offense performed. And that's my side of the ball. That's my specialty. So it's an easy excuse to make to either fans, which I know we won't buy it, but fans, but more importantly to Mark Davis, to say, hey, look, the offense is really making strides. We're doing good. We've moved up. We're scoring more points. What blah, 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 whatever. The defense struggled. Let me get a new defensive coordinator. It just didn't work with him. So it's kind of like, I feel like, and listen, McDaniels he's got some character issues. Right? I think we all can. Don't think there's anything wrong with questioning the guy's character. You see what he did in Indianapolis? Got a weird way about him, and the way the whole DC thing was handled. I mean, I wasn't a DC guy per se, but it could have been handled differently. So could McDaniels angle that way to try to make sure that he saves himself? I think it's possible. Absolutely, it's possible. And so if I'm Patrick Graham, man, I think he's in a tough spot, and it's got to hit. Now, of course, McDaniels and Ziegler want the defense to hit. Of course they do. I'm not saying they're trying to sabotage the defense. What I am saying, though, is McDaniels is more concerned about being able to say the offense worked so that he can justify himself to Davis and somewhat try to whatever fans are willing to give him that slack, although I don't think that's going to be many, and then just be able to have a scapegoat. Right? The scapegoat is Patrick Graham if the defense don't improve. Now, if the defense don't improve, Patrick Graham should go. I mean, there's no question about it. But let's face it, the McDaniels and them aren't exactly doing him any favors to try to help him improve that by bringing in some real studs in some real key positions. And there have been those guys available in this free agency. Look, the free agency class wasn't the greatest, but there were lots of players that there were options to try to get. Now, we don't know if some of those players didn't come because they didn't want to play with McDaniels or they didn't want to play with the Raiders. We don't know. So maybe they wanted some of these players and it just couldn't happen because the player wasn't willing, and that's possible. But, we're going to see what happens. And Patrick Graham has got a lot on the line, and, a lot of this team's success is going to be based on how this draft goes and how that defense performs. So, hey, but you know what? That's just what I think. That's what I think is going to happen in the draft. That's what I think is going to happen with Budda Baker and Devin White. I don't think that they're coming here. I don't think it's going to happen. But tell me what you think. Comments. Subscribe. Hit that thumbs up. Notification bell. Give us some feedback. We appreciate it. Until next time, we're out.